More wiring madness. This time we're going to focus on the starter, the AC, and eventually the alternator, but that's going to require the most research. This is pretty straightforward. So on the Explorer harness, it's pretty simple right now because there's a chunk missing, but starter power wire goes to the battery terminal. There's another lead that goes off to the fuse box. The engine ground right here goes to the battery. The starter main power goes up to that point. And we have the oil level sensor, starter exciter wire, and then the main power to the starter. So this starter exciter wire comes out in that branch that's cut. So that's going to get merged with this 3.0 harness, which is the same thing. The same, because there's the starter right there. It doesn't have an oil level sensor in the same spot or at all, but that's it. And then it's actually combined with the alternator power wire, some AC switches, and then the fuse box connectors and the main battery terminal there. And here's the ground. So I'm going to blow away all of the sheathing, mix and match parts to get this to all meld together into one harness. And I think I'm going to adjust where this starter wire runs, mainly because it should come through the front of the engine, mount around the crank pulley, and then that runs right under here. And that's where my crossover pipe is going to be, probably down here. So it might be okay. I have to slap one of the spare motor mounts in there to see how much space I have to work with, because if it's far enough away and I wrap that pipe and I wrap that with some fiberglass sheathing, it should be totally fine, and then I can just route it factory. But if I can't, then I'll probably go from the battery back over and down. So that's the plan B. Harnesses are deloomed, obviously. Got the Explorer harness here, the 3.0 harness here. So the big red is our power to the starter right there. That's our main ground for the engine. I'm gonna pull those out of this harness. I'm gonna pull the starter power wire and wherever that ground, yeah, it's right there. Pull that ground out of the 3.0 harness and then move the Explorer big wires to this harness. Then for the starter exciter wire, which is the yellow one, since it's been cut on the Explorer, I'm going to just lay it out with the power wire into the 3.0 harness, and then wherever the two overlap, that's where I'm going to cut and splice and connect the two. Then what I'll have left is alternator power, which goes right to the fuse box. So if it doesn't work out, I can pull that separately and just have a separate wire running onto the top of the engine to the alternator. And then all the AC stuff, that'll just kind of lay in to wherever I need it to lay in. Worst case, I'll just have these wires going to the V8 starters on their own like branch of the main harness that goes on top. That way I don't have to worry about trying to keep them all tucked up and together like they are in the 3.0 harness. But that will hopefully let me keep this connector plug and play, where I don't have to make any modifications to this, because this is where the AC switches and the starter signal go through. And if the Explorer one, I think is a different style, or it's slightly bigger. I can't really remember at the moment, but I do have it. I can compare it later when I dig it out of the box. But if I can make that plug and play, then this will be like the most extensive part of the wiring that you would have to do in like a stock swap, is swapping around the components of the I guess you call it a starter harness, even though there's more to it than a starter. It's just a starter. Now, what I don't know for certain is if the Explorer, the cutoff portion of this would be a plug and play for the fuse box. So they've got these winged connectors here. So if they just happen to be the same on Explorer, then it'd probably be a bolt and swap, but I'm not entirely sure. This would be the really the determining factor as to making it as bolt-in as, or plug-and-play as possible. So I will have I have my little write-up accompanied in a link to accompany this video. It'll be in the link in the description. So I wanted to give a helpful tip for how to get started with something like this, like moving stuff around. So what I'll typically do is start on one end that I know is a common point, and you don't always have that, but in this case I do. It's going to be the battery. So I've just got my 2 battery terminals clicked or clamped together in the cuff, and that kind of gives me an idea of how these 2 harnesses lay out. The Explorer harness is up here, 3.0 harness is down here. So knowing that point, I can see this battery negative is a little short on the Explorer harness, but depending on how it's routed on the 3.0 harness, this very well could be just long enough. If not, a ground strap is not that imperative. I can just keep that out of the harness for now and run it separate, which I think I might do anyway. Now, if you had something like I have the starter exciter wire that needs to be precisely cut and spliced to match up to the rest of the harness, this is a good way where you've got that common point. You can kind of clip them together and then find where you need to make that cut. So it looks like I need to make that cut right around here, and then that branch should be, in theory, the correct length. So what at this point, I'm going to pull out the stuff that I don't need out of the 3.0 harness. Is this. I'm going to cut this a little long, or I could just leave it alone. And then graft these 2 harnesses together in this area, throw it on the engine in the truck, and then have a complete test fit before I actually make that final connection. Got the wiring mocked up for the starter and AC and all that good stuff and the alternator. So if you're wondering, this looks like this is how the 3.0 lays in here. So the red lead goes to the front post, and that is for the battery, and then the black with the orange stripe goes to the back post, and that is for the alternator. So if I remember correctly, the wiring harness does like run up in this direction and then down, and there's actually a little flag right here that looks like it would hold a clip for the harness. So I believe that's the correct routing. So this flag being a 90, there we go. This flag being a 90 tells me that there's really no other direction that this can lay in here unless it comes out the back, and the plastic of this cover keeps it from doing that. So, moving on. This is the connector for the starter signal and the AC stuff. It goes right there to that guy. And if we come out here, we've got the battery positive, negative, and then moving down, there's a connector for the AC. I think this is a pressure switch that goes on one of the lines here. And then on the 3.0, we would be engine ground and starter power, and then starter exciter. And what do we got here? This is AC, I believe. Yeah, that's for the AC compressor. So that's gonna go up here somewhere. And then on the exploder harness, this will actually be over here. Engine ground. And then we follow it around, and this will be right about there on the starter. So I'm gonna continue with combining these 2 harnesses and then pulling out the 3.0 stuff. So it's just left with the exploder stuff, and then splice together that starter wire so that we're connected to the exploder harness, not the 3.0. But it looks like, as far as laying it out in here, I don't have to make any major modifications to this entire harness other than just combining the pieces that I need to combine. So that's good news. So, mocking up the power wires to the starter, and the starter exciter wire has a little flag here. Now, I don't have the Explorer starter here, but I imagine this post is on the other side. Just given the way that the wire kind of laid, it wanted to be down there. But also, when I slip this on, like that's the only direction that it can go on. Which I'm not entirely thrilled about having it that close, but I'm going to run it as is. But I just wanted to show you that if you did have an issue where you couldn't put it anywhere other than that, you can just take a pair of channel hammers here and just bend that flag out of the way. But I'm going to try and put it right there and see if that completely clears, which it looks like it does. So I may not even include this. Yeah, it doesn't look like it comes in contact with anything other than the post it needs to. So I think that's good. Let's walk through this harness and I'll go over some of the layout that I did. So we'll start just like normal. The starter power and exciter, the ground comes around here. Now the first junction is going to be in the truck somewhere around here. And in this junction, we've got the breakout leg for the negative terminal in the battery. And if this turns out to be not long enough, what I'm going to do is cut down here, and that's why I haven't put any split loom over it. I'm going to cut down here and then splice in a nice long piece, probably from the scrap that I've got there. And that way I have a little extra room to work with. But I'm thinking it'll lay out perfectly where it'll just come right up to the negative terminal. So next branch junction we got here is all of the small connectors. So we'll start with this big one. This is the alternator power wire. So from the fuse box here, I've got the wire here, and I hate T-joints. Like a lot of factory harnesses, they just have a T-joint, and it's never easy to loom. So this is not the best solution, but there was plenty of slack in that alternator wiring. So I just looped it up and then back down. And that way, once I get this all figured out and finalized with a new terminal, I can put some split loom over this and then tape it all up so it's all nice and tidy. So that comes down, goes through there. That'll go right to the alternator. And if I have to, I'll source a new boot. I might have one kicking around, but if not, I'll have a part number for that as well, or a link. The other branches here, the most important one being the starter signal and AC signals, and that's going to go to that connector right there. And between this connector it's the branch being somewhere around here, and that connector, there's plenty of slack to make that connection. Next up, we've got the AC compressor wiring, plenty of slack here for that. And then finally, the pressure switches for the AC. So that's going to go somewhere up in here. I'm not exactly sure where. So, continuing up, the rest of it we kind of already covered. Got a battery connection here for the positive side. And this is just the remainder of the Explorer harness. So, I separated the aftermarket, the real crappy aftermarket battery terminal from the 3.0 harness, and just pulled out the main power that goes to the fuse box. This is the main power from the starter that provides the heavy, or all the heavy amps when cranking. So these two will get combined into a nice aftermarket battery terminal. I have yet to purchase yet, but we'll get it on there, and I'll have a link in the description if you like it. Well, in the Excel file that I'm linked to in the description. So now I'm going to take this harness and throw it on the engine so that it's looped through the mounts there and on the other side to make sure that it all lays out nice on the engine, and then I can just leave it on there, really.